Hey everyone, it's Mark from Circle of Dark Mother. Today I'm going to do a reading from my myth from my book Embracing Lilith. This is part 19. I want to call out again that this is a myth. It takes all the different myths that are or could be related to Lilith and puts them together. It's not meant that it happened this way, but it is a myth to get spiritual ideas across. Chapter 18. Sometime later, he fell in love with the woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can empower him so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." Judges 16:4-5. I grew tired of wandering and I hoped I could regain some calm by being in one place, so I took human form and posed as a Philistine woman. The name Naamah had become associated with me and with wrathful spirits, causing legends to spring up claiming Naamah was my daughter or sister. I decided to change things up and use the name Delilah, which means desirable. I took an extremely beautiful form because life for women in those times was very hard, and I wanted every advantage I could get. I lived as Delilah for quite a while and eventually came to the notice of an Israelite named Samson. He tried to court me, and I must admit I fell for his charms, falling into his bed maybe a little more quickly than I should have. Samson was a Hebrew judge or holy person who helped dispense the law. He was extremely good looking, charming, and had the strength of a dozen men. We married, and I lived with him. Beginning to regain myself and casting aside the darkness which had filled me, I can't say I was in love with him, but I did care for him, and he provided a nice distraction from my anger. Eventually, I lost the utter darkness in my soul, and my true eyes returned to their natural green. After a year, Philistine leaders came to me in private and asked me to find the secret to Samson's strength so they could capture him and have victory over the Jewish people. I, of course, refused, but it did get me thinking about his great strength and prowess. I knew he had some sort of magic about him, but I had no idea of the nature of his secret or its origin. After a few months, my curiosity got the best of me, and I asked him. He confided in me out of his love. He had been born into an order which dedicated him to Yahweh Elohim at birth. His parents pledged his hair would never be cut as long as he lived. The sorcery gave him strength, protection from harm, and gave him a level of charm most mortals cannot attain. He wore his hair in 7 long braids tied to the back of his head, so the fact that it had never been cut was not as obvious. I stored away this knowledge and went back to my everyday life. Over time, I grew to care more and more for Samson. He was a good man and someone who cared deeply for his people. I wasn't thrilled he was dedicated to Yahweh Elohim, but I never saw any indication my parents interacted with him in any way, so I ignored the connection. He lamented the fact we didn't have any children together, but love for his Delilah meant enough not to let it get in the way of our relationship. I believe the magic placed on him prevented me from producing my spiritual daughters, the Lilin, because the entire time we stayed together, none were born. One morning, I found Samson sitting up in bed looking at me with a strange look on his face. His face seemed so devoid of emotion, I wondered if he still slept. But then he opened his mouth with a slight grin and said, "I'm back." I pulled away in revulsion. I knew had spoken. It wasn't Samson. Samael had somehow possessed Samson during the night. "How did you crawl out of the pit I cast you in?" "It wasn't easy, love, but as always I prevailed. And now I'm back and we can be together again." I sneered, "What makes you think I want anything to do with you? Or that I won't cast you back into the hell realms?" "Because you won't hurt your precious Samson. I have no intention of leaving his body. And until I do, you can't do anything to me without hurting him." I took spiritual form, spoke the secret name of God, and reached out to pull Samael out of my husband's body. But nothing happened. He laughed and said, "The magic imbued in him also protects me from being cast out. I guess you're stuck with me." I returned to human form and left the house, walking the streets trying to decide what to do. I didn't see any way out. I wouldn't abandon Samson, and I also wouldn't cast him to the lower realms to get rid of Samael. The husband I had created had really won. I endured Samael's invasion, pretending in front of everyone all was well. How could I explain that Satan, the accuser, had possessed the powerful Hebrew judge without causing a panic or making people think me crazy? At times when Samson's body slept, Samael would loosen control and Samael's personality would surface. At first, he thought it a nightmare and begged to wake up, but after a time, he realized what had happened was all too real. He begged me to kill him. I couldn't bear to hurt him. I kept hoping Samael would somehow make a mistake and I could protect this sweet man. I eventually devised a plan, and one night when Samson's body slept and he regained momentary control, I cut his hair from his head, breaking the magic that gave him strength and protected him. I immediately took spiritual form and yanked Samael from his body, casting him into the air. Samael wore a look of shock, but I'd only momentarily caught him off guard. Before I could do anything else, he disappeared in a dark shimmer, fleeing my wrath. Samson remained weak and confused, but whole. Once I felt Samson had recovered sufficiently, I told him I needed to travel to see my family. I used my powers to persuade him not to worry. What I really did was head out in search of Samael, seeking his essence and trying to find him in the city or elsewhere. I feared he would come back and find some other way to torment my husband and me. I knew I wouldn't be able to live with Samson forever. He was human, but for that moment, I needed this life and a partner whom I could trust. I searched and searched for over a week, but couldn't find Samael, so I gave up. I returned home and found no one there. Samson had vanished. I looked everywhere, assuming Samael had taken him back, but eventually found Samson had been captured by the Philistines. They kept him prisoner in a temple not too far from our home. I went there to try to enter in my spiritual form, but something blocked me, and I couldn't penetrate its walls. Some sort of sorcery kept me from entering, so I took up my role as Delilah and told the guards I had purposely cut Samson's hair so they could capture him. They let me in and presented me to the priests of their temple. I told them tales they wanted to hear about being a proud Philistine woman and how much I loved our gods. After a time, they told me to leave and to return in a week, for they would be putting Samson on display for all to see. I could do nothing else but comply, since I couldn't enter the temple and whisk my husband away. When I returned, I sat in a great hall with Philistine dignitaries and priests, who touted me as a model citizen for the supposed betrayal of my husband. I went along with it so I could see him and somehow get him away. Whatever magic had been performed on the walls appeared too strong for even me to overcome, so I waited. Eventually, they led Samson in, and I gasped. They had gouged out his eyes and were leading him by chains. I went over to him, acting like I wanted to gloat, but I whispered into his ear, "I'm here to save you." He shook his head no. His only words to me were, "Get out." He didn't say them in rage, but instead in warning. He intended to do something, but I didn't know what. I stepped back and they dragged him over to a pillar in the center of the hall. He leaned up against it and I saw him smile as he began to push. A great commotion arose as the support beam began to move and the building began to collapse around us. As the ceiling crashed down, I took spiritual form so my body would not be crushed. I watched Samson along with everyone else in the temple die. With the destruction of the supporting walls, the magic in the building disappeared, and I could move freely from the structure. I had no idea how Samson gained the strength to act, but as much as I mourned his death, I knew it was exactly what he wanted in the end.